Hi, this is Steve Millard with the Greater Akron Chamber. Welcome to Advocacy in Action. And in this episode, we're going to have some fun talking about the things that are happening in Columbus and D.C. You know, we take our time each week to talk to folks who really have their finger on the pulse. And I got to tell you, we're real lucky to have a guy like John Rizzo, who's our Vice President of the Akron Canton Advocacy Alliance, doing the work he's doing on our members' behalf. So welcome, John. I'm glad you're here today.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Happy to be here.
So lots been going on from the federal level and the state level, and really doing the thing that governments need to do is set their budgets and their sort of plans for the year. Maybe this year's a little different, with a one big beautiful bill with everything all jammed together into one thing. And at the state level, of course, we have a biennial operating budget. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we think that the business community needs to know about that has come out of both of these processes. Before we get into the details of policy and budgets and those kinds of things, I'd love to spend a little bit of time doing a little bit of so I'm going to age myself here, but I grew up watching, the Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law sort of stuff. But there is a real process here that is structured to get us through these things. I wonder if we could spend a little bit of time talking at the state and the federal level about what the process is that creates these results that we had here recently. So let's start with the state and the state operating budget. How frequent is that? How does that process work? Sort of at a high level.
Yeah, sure. So there's certainly a process. It is many things. A process is one of them. But at the state level, the state operating budget, folks may have seen it in the media as House Bill 96 for the last 6 months or so. But it's the state's primary vehicle through which it funds all of its programs and operations. So not things like physical assets, typically, not roads and bridges. There's other budgets for those things, but programs and operations of the entirety of state government. Every even-numbered year, the administration gets with its state agencies, state departments, to begin to formulate what ultimately becomes the governor's executive budget recommendations, which is also known as the governor's blue book, and that gets introduced at the very beginning, typically in January of each odd-numbered year.
Got it.
And that kicks off a process where the governor has then released his funding and policy priorities within the blue book, and then the House creates legislation based on those recommendations.
Or at least what they think of those recommendations.
Correct. Well, it does its best to interpret what the governor would like to see happen into a single bill, and then a committee process unfolds where the House Finance Committee kind of oversees the budget legislation itself. Again, this year it was House Bill 96, but the individual committees with subject matter expertise break that bill into many, many pieces. They hold committee hearings. They review each of the fine details included within those sections. They welcome people to come in and provide testimony, opposition, support, just interested party testimony. There's a great deal of engagement that goes on with the public throughout the process. But ultimately, after each committee kind of does its work on the individual pieces and parts of the state operating budget, the House Finance Committee is who ultimately then advances it out of committee to the floor of the full House. They then vote on it. In Ohio, this go around, the Republicans have a supermajority, so it passed pretty smoothly once it got through the amendment process and the committee process, and then the same process unfolds in the Senate.
From scratch, from the budget, from the governor's original blue book, or do they start with the House budget?
They typically react directly to the as passed by the House version of the budget. The Senate the whole time is doing their own work and deliberation based on the governor's budget recommendations and based on their own priorities that they want to see in the budget. But once the House passes their version of the budget, that document gets sent over to the Senate. It gets applied to the Senate Finance Committee, and then again, a broader set of Senate committees then do the same work that the House did. And, both the House and Senate, they produce several rounds of amendments. And once the Senate passes its version, it gets sent back to the House, and that triggers one of two things. One, the House could just agree with the Senate's version of the budget. They could send it to the governor and be done. What typically happens is the House does not concur with the Senate version of the budget, and that triggers a conference committee. And during conference committee, the administration, the House and Senate, key leaders from those three entities get together, and they hash out the differences, which then produces a final bill that all parties agree to. and then get sent to the governor. And he would then sign it by June 30th. Our fiscal year in Ohio ends on June 30th and begins on July 1st. They beat that deadline, so there was no issue there. And then the funding aspects of the state operating budget become effective immediately. The policy aspects of the state operating budget are effective in 90 days, as with a regular piece of legislation that doesn't have something like an emergency clause attached to it.
So I want to get into what that means in a second, but the other thing that's maybe unique somewhat in Ohio, the governor does have this line item veto ability, right? So it can go through this whole process, and then the governor can then selectively decide on things that maybe he doesn't feel great about, that don't match up to his vision. He can veto them. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Governor DeWine certainly chose to utilize that ability this go around. He vetoed 67 line items within the finalized state
That's
operating
a lot,
budget legislation.
Right?
It's about 2 or 3 times more than he has in the past, and that most governors have in the past. There was, just like with any piece of big legislation, there was some that folks agreed with, some that folks didn't agree with. He vetoed a lot of property tax provisions that the House and Senate spent a lot of time looking at. That's causing some, additional planning and action on the legislature's part as they plan to override at least 3 of those property tax vetoes. But then he also did things that, we in the economic development space were happy with. Like he eliminated some sunset clauses that were attached to certain tax credits that we feel actually helps long-term economic development planning.
So in this process, as you said, it starts in the summer, fall of the even-numbered years. The governor puts his blue book out there around March, April, something like that?
Typically in January.
In
the
January.
governor would
that
put
early.
his executive recommendations out. The House works on it for the next 2 or 3 months. The Senate does its stuff over the next couple months itself. Conference committee, though, always wraps up. They have to have a final state operating budget signed by the governor by June 30th.
Okay, so that puts time on press. But mostly what's done in Columbus in the first half of a odd-numbered year is budget.
Correct. And anyone looking to engage in that process, again, it's a massive budget, tens of billions of dollars, also a place where a great deal of policy gets done. For those looking to really make an impact, stepping into that conversation in March, April, May, you're way too late. You really want to begin talking with state agencies, the governor's office, key legislators, your local representatives, the fall of the even-numbered year leading into a state operating budget.
Yeah, that typically is how when we're developing our agenda and when we're talking to people about it. So that's state level. Federal level processes fairly similar. I mean, same kinds of steps, right?
Similar steps. What the one big beautiful bill was a federal reconciliation bill. So that's a little different than just general federal appropriation bills. Reconciliation bills, they can make changes to spending, debt limit, revenue, but pass with just a simple majority vote, which avoids a Senate filibuster as well. Just like at the state level, we saw President Trump put out his recommendations that reflected his priorities, both in terms of policy and funding. And a very similar process unfolded at the federal level then in the state of Ohio. Congress first puts out a resolution. It includes reconciliation instructions, which again then triggers the simple majority vote, bypassing the Senate filibuster. They assign various committees these instructions, who then work on passing various titles for different pieces and parts of what will become one reconciliation bill, one piece of broader legislation. Once they do that, the same process unfolds then in the Senate. At the federal level, though, Republicans don't enjoy the same luxury that state level Republicans do, in that their margins are much, much slimmer. So there was a ton of media coverage. People questioned if this was going to happen. But to quite many people's surprise, it got through, and the results of which, again, people could debate good or bad. But as far as the business community goes, many of the things that we had prioritized over the last really 2 to 4 years landed in good spots.
So let's talk about some of those things. I don't know if you want to start state or federal, but let's talk about some of the things you think are most significant for our business leaders, business owners, and really people who sort of are focused on, the kinds of things we are: economic development, workforce, those things. should care the most about from these budgets?
Yeah, so if you've been anywhere around any chamber of commerce across the country and you're talking federal tax policy, there were several really important provisions included within the federal reconciliation bill, one of which kind of at the top of that list is the 20% Section 199A qualified business income deduction. It was made permanent. That was set to sunset at the end of this year, and if that were to happen, literally millions of businesses across the country would have seen almost a 20% increase in their federal taxes every year. So that's a pretty significant.
Essentially losing a deduction that
Correct.
a lot of them rely on and get a lot of value from.
Correct.
Talk about that deduction for a minute for folks who may not be so familiar with it.
Yeah, so this in and of itself is not just a tax break for businesses. It provides long-term certainty for pass-through businesses like sole proprietorships, partnerships, S corps. And one thing that the reconciliation bill also did is it increased the income thresholds to $75,000 for single filers and $150,000 for joint filers, whereas before it was $50,000 and $100,000. So what that does is it expands the pool of businesses that can take full advantage of that full 20% deduction. After those thresholds, it adjusts it, and you benefit slightly less from it, but it expands the pool of businesses that can benefit from it.
So when you talk about the thresholds, you're talking about the amount of income the business reports.
Correct.
Is the threshold, and it went from $50,000 to get the at which you get the full 20% to $75,000. So $25,000 more of my income can be subject to this 20%
Correct.
Deduction. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And so that makes it's more valuable then for businesses, and it widens again the benefit, and you still get benefit for income beyond that, but just at a declining rate.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Great. So that's a big one. That's a really big deal. That's one that a lot of businesses have been talking about. And, a lot of the discussion was if we don't pass this bill, people are going to have a tax increase. The reality is that the old taxes would have just come back into play. They just don't get the deduction. But it's really good news for a lot of our small businesses to be able to get that. What else at the federal level is worth noting?
So another issue that's kind of been at the top of mind for the business community over the last couple of years has been fixing a solution to a problem that we argue never existed, and it was fixing R&D amortization. So there's an R&D tax credit that businesses can claim. The bill allows businesses who are investing in R&D to deduct those expenses in the year in which they're incurred. That was the pre-2017 law. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made it so that they could only get those funds back over 5 years.
Okay. So basically, if I spent, let's say that I'm developing a new product, and I spend $100,000 this year to do what I have to do to develop that product. In the past, I could take that all in the year I spent it, right? And basically, effectively, it offsets against the income I have in the business, right? And it allows me to make those investments, get credit for those investments. It lowers my taxable income, which is a really great benefit.
Correct. The year in which you made those investments versus over 5 years.
So when the change got made, it basically took that $100,000 and said, yeah, even though you spent $100,000 this year, you can only take it $20,000 at a time over the next 5 years, basically leaving me out of pocket for that R&D investment with no ability to recover that against my income. So I'm paying taxes basically on higher income, even when I've spent money to sort of develop the future of my business.
Correct.
Got that about right? Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then one thing that we had advocated for alongside national partners like the National Small Business Association, many of our small business leaders, was to retroactively apply this fix. And that was also included in the reconciliation bill. So now, depending on how you're incorporated, you can actually go back
and recapture
that to varying dates in 2021, depending on, again, how you're incorporated, your income and size and things like that.
And I think that's a super big deal because anybody who understands successful businesses knows that you have to constantly reinvest in your products and your services and your technology and those kinds of things to keep yourself out in front. And we did see a reduction in the willingness of firms to make R&D investments because you're pretty much limited by the cash that you have and your income characteristics. You can't, you don't get a benefit for investing in R&D in the same way that you used to. So now that's back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. There's a little bit of focus on child tax credit and how the tax credit affects and supports workers and employers. Talk about that a little bit, because while it doesn't sound businessy to begin with, it does have a big impact on workforce and on employers.
Absolutely. It did a couple things. One, it made the individual child care tax credit permanent. It slightly increased it to $2,226, and then it indexes that child tax credit moving forward. It indexes it with inflation moving forward. So it's that in and of itself is a more generous and permanent program that helps working families manage the cost of raising children and staying in the workforce. There was also an enhanced employer-provided child care credit for those employers who are helping their employees offset the cost of child care.
So I can do even more of that and get tax advantage for that.
Correct.
Yeah, great. So you talked earlier about policy and budget, kind of two separate things. That when at the state level specifically, you said all the financial pieces go into place, July 1, but the policy pieces are still being developed. Give that a little bit more light in terms of what you're talking about there.
So the funding aspects of the state operating budget, because our fiscal year starts on July 1st, are always effective July 1st, the day after the bill is signed.
State fiscal year.
Correct.
Right? Yep.
The policy aspects of it, short of an emergency clause, are effective 90 days after the governor signs it, which is just as with any piece of state level legislation. So in the budget, again, there's funding for existing programs, there's funding for local governments, schools, all this different stuff. All that funding is immediately on the table as of July 1st. Things like new property tax laws or new programs that need to be stood up and created, those kinds of things take time not only to take effect because they're new policy, but for things like new programs, they would then also take time on the administrative end to actually stand up and roll out.
So the 90-day period gives the agencies the time they need to begin to develop the rules and the processes to get something done? Is that part of it?
It also, just with the Ohio Constitution and the way our government's formed, legislation, short of having an emergency clause or a direct appropriations impact, it's effective 90 days after signing, after it's filed with the Secretary of State.
Got it. So that's time for people to sort of object and join, offer different changes, or to create frameworks around it, or not?
Yeah, no, I mean, at that point, it's done.
It's done.
Yeah,
Okay.
once it's
Got it.
filed with the Secretary of State and the governor's signatures on it, it's a done deal. That's not to say that, there couldn't be an overturn of it later by the legislature or the
Right.
will of the people through the ballot process. But at that point, no, the process is finished up.
Yeah. So I think maybe the implications of that. I was in a meeting recently where we were talking about some of the things that had just passed the federal legislation and how they're going to affect this business. And as we were talking to the auditors and the accountants about it, they're still figuring out the details, right? Like some of this stuff takes a little bit of time to figure out, okay, what do they mean? How do you apply it? What's the actual rule? So I think businesses should expect their advisors to begin to get up to speed on these things, and over the next few months have better answers to what the specific implications are for their companies.
And the information at the state and federal level, I think, will be broadly communicated and understood maybe at different speeds. At the state level, there's a great deal of specifics already out there. The Ohio Legislative Service Commission, the Ohio Legislature, the governor's office, they do a good job at putting everything out there for people to review, which helps, the accountants at the law firms of the world quickly kind of digest what that information is. At the federal level, there aren't the same kinds of detailed resources readily available. But either way, your service providers, your professional firms, they'll be the ones first really understanding this and communicating it to clients and to the public. And to your point, over the next several months, as they digest it, we'll all be in a better position to understand what the real world implications are.
So we talked at the federal level about some of the things that are important. What about the state level? Give us some examples of a few decisions that got made in this budget process that are going to have an impact on businesses, on our workforce efforts, economic development efforts, et cetera.
Yeah, so there's, again, a lot of funding, tens of billions of dollars. But the things that we've been tracking as the Akron Canton Advocacy Alliance is a business community. Again, there's several buckets that are just super important: economic development, workforce, business support. If you look at the economic development tools that we really look at as assets in our different activities across the region, there's more money for the historic rehabilitation tax credit. It's $15 million more than last biennium. There's $200 million more for brownfield remediation, which has been pretty applicable to our region. There's additional money and some policy improvements to the Transformational Mixed-Use Development Credit, or TMUD as it's commonly referred to. Opportunity zones, again, have another $100 million applied to it, which is $50 million more than last state operating budget, and another $43 million for demolition and site revitalization that aren't brownfields.
So these are all pretty technical programs that apply for certain kinds of development activities. But as a whole, in a community like Akron and Canton and our region, where you're looking to do adaptive redevelopment, where we're really struggling to make sure we have the sites that are required to attract companies here, where we're trying to sort of reinvigorate some of the things that are happening here. These are all tools that provide great opportunities to developers, to folks that want to locate here, to get something done.
Yeah, absolutely. Not every project fits, each of these programs, but you can pick and choose or use some combination of these programs when you're looking at building a capital stack for a project.
So economic development, again, I think overall, and we're going to hear this a few times as we talk about this, but at the state level, for at least for the business community and for economic development, this is a pretty good budget. I know there are always winners and losers every year in the budget process, and there are some things that got pulled back in different areas, but I think for a lot of the work that we're doing, we're encouraged. Talk about some of the workforce related things that showed up in this budget that are worth talking about.
Yeah, a couple returning favorites, I'd call them, with tech cred and industry sector partnerships. I think at this point, some folks almost take those programs for granted, but they're still unique when you look at the entire country. Tech cred is, $2,000 per credential for employer-driven skills training opportunities for existing or incoming employees. That program continues to grow. It's about $50 million, once again, over the next 2 years. Industry sector partnerships, it's another $10. Both those funding levels for each of those respective programs is comparable to last biennium. But again, both support super important workforce-oriented activities across the state, both of which are utilized in the Akron Canton region.
We have some other, in some of our podcasts, we've talked a little bit about tech cred, but I would encourage any company who's not familiar with tech cred and has a workforce that needs any kind of training, whether it's training folks on certain kinds of processes in their business or just training your staff on better using Excel or Word or things like that. There is real money available, so you can get some of those tax dollars back from the state to reinvest in your company for your employees. And I think there are 6 cycles a year, and I think companies can get up to about $30,000 per cycle, so that they can really make a difference in their training costs and development costs for their staff through tech cred. So I'd encourage folks to look into that a little bit more. There's more information on tech cred on our website as well, but we're happy to help companies figure out how to get access to that money.
Well, not on tech cred too. If the thousands of existing credentials and certifications aren't what you need, getting new ones added to that is a process that they publicize and are very open to.
Yeah, the state's been really committed to training and investing in current employees and investing in people who can be employees at a higher skill level for our company. So John, keeping with the workforce piece, talk about child care, because there was specific stuff done there too.
Yeah, so we already mentioned a few things that happened in the federal reconciliation bill related to child care, but in the state operating budget, it included a new program called the Child Care Cred Program, which is a tri-share model that's been debated and discussed in a couple different pieces of legislation over the last couple of years. But essentially, it's a tri-share model where an employer, an employee, and the state share the cost of child care for that employee.
Like a third, something like that?
It's 40, 40, and 20. So 40 for the employer, 40 for the employee, 20 for the state.
Okay.
And the provider that they go to, they have to be on a list of approved child care providers with the state, so they have to be of a certain quality. They all have capacity limitations. But it's a new program that a lot of people have been advocating for. There's still a great deal of things that address child care, not just from an access and affordability perspective, but a quality and capacity perspective that the legislature still plans to work on just through the regular legislative process that we're excited about.
Right. Talk about capital, loan programs, those kinds of things. Anything of note there?
Yeah, so they've continued funding for the minority business direct loan program, the women-owned business loan program, and the microloan program, all three of those not exclusively for the audiences that they're designed for, but they are great set-aside resources for these companies that, but for them, some of these folks would not be able to get access to capital through traditional programs. So there's extremely low interest rates attached to each of these programs. You need different certifications for different ones. The microloan program, for example, you need either the Ohio MBE or WBE certification. There's some other groups that these different programs will accept, but the bottom line is the state's continuing to invest in Ohio's women and minority-owned companies through programs like this.
And I think one of the things that, as we talk to the state and the folks who are in development, et cetera, there's a real commitment to making sure the smaller businesses in our community are getting access to the resources they need to grow. I think it's this administration has been, I think, very focused on helping businesses of all sizes to get access to the resources that they need. And I think these programs being renewed and continuing to be funded is sort of doubling down on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So we had this huge process last fall where there was a one-time opportunity for folks to get access to some funds in communities for community projects, to build assets in communities and do projects in communities that can benefit the community broadly through the state capital budget process. Will that happen again, or how? What do you see the future of some of the capital budget activities here? And was there anything done in this year's budget around that?
So I'll start with this year's budget. There was a reappropriation of unencumbered funds from the previous state capital budget of the one-time Strategic Community Investment Fund awards. So that was a long sentence, but
so what did you say again? What does that mean?
So of the SCIF, or the one-time Strategic Community Investment Fund projects awarded in the last state capital budget
2 years ago or so.
And those were the one-time funds that were facilitated through the otherwise traditional state capital bill.
Right.
Any project that was awarded that hasn't fully encumbered their funds or actually gotten their funds or gotten through whatever back-end process there is to actually use those funds, they reappropriated those funds for the same purposes.
So they didn't lose them. Typically,
Correct.
You'd lose them if you didn't use them by a certain deadline.
Correct.
And so they realized that those are big projects, maybe a little harder to get them going, so they've given them a little more time.
Correct. And that was quietly a big deal. That wasn't really something that got too much attention, but that's a really big deal for any project that may have millions just sitting in a state account.
That's great. And then will there be a capital budget process this year? Have you heard anything?
The couple dozen legislators we've talked to, we fully expect there to be. The Ohio legislature is not constitutionally obligated to do one. They have no duty to do one like they do a state operating budget. But all signs point to them having some version of it. But again, folks will need to remember the opportunities for funding community projects, like in this most recent cycle, will be completely different. The last capital budget had all those one-time funds. This cycle, we'll be getting back to basics, back to a much more traditional pool of funding for community projects within the broader state capital bill.
And John, do you expect us to go through a process of helping organizations applying for that, get more information about that, and get their projects a little bit more visibility again this year?
Yeah, we'll be standing up a whole effort, quite frankly, to help folks navigate the process. We'll be doing a webinar in September, just trying to inform folks what the process is, how to navigate it, connect with their elected officials. But yeah, as a chamber, both in the Akron and Canton regions, we'll have two separate but simultaneous processes that we're going to run alongside state legislators and community stakeholders to solicit, review, and try to really highlight and promote priority projects for community project funding within the state capital budget.
And these are projects not for companies. These are projects for communities. They're parks, they're bridges, they're utilities, they're community assets, all kinds of things that can get connected to providing value for the state and its residents in different areas of our community. So if you have been a part of that process, keep your eyes out for more information about that as we go forward. Yeah. So let's close up just by talking for a second about the Akron Canton Advocacy Alliance and what it's all about. I mentioned it at the beginning. We've done some stuff in the past a little bit on it, but just in a nutshell, if you could talk about the Alliance and if people are interested, how to get involved and how to get more information.
Yeah, so the Akron Canton Advocacy Alliance, for anyone who that may be a new term for, it's a collaboration between the Greater Akron Chamber and the Canton Regional Chamber to represent the collective needs of our membership bases to elected officials. My team and I are joint staff resources. We spend time at both chambers, and really it's stakeholders from both chambers working together on all things policy. So we have one public policy agenda, one set of meetings with elected officials. We do D.C. fly-ins, Columbus drive-ins, everything we do now the two regions do together through one vehicle.
Representing more than, 5,000, 6,000 businesses at this point?
Yeah, we're a little over 5,000 across a 6-county footprint. We have about an 80-person roster of active participants that come to meetings and events and things like that, but especially this fall when we do the policy conference in leadership reception, that is a come one, come all. This fall at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, we'll be doing a panel with some state legislators detailing the state capital budget process and also just facilitating some discussions amongst friends and, having a networking session as well. So that's an event where we welcome anybody interested in the advocacy space or with a particular interest in the state capital budget to really consider coming out. But our website, akroncantadvocacy.org, provides not just all the information in detail of the types of things we advocate for, but all the upcoming events, our past advocacy updates, ways to sign up to get on our distribution list and all of that.
Akron Canton Advocacy.org has all the information. Do you got to be a policy nerd to be involved with this stuff? Or if you're just a regular business owner and you have some interest in public policy, is it a place for you? Give me a sense of that.
Yeah, no, not at all. Do you have to be a lobbyist, a policy expert? We actually pursue those who bring that small business perspective to the discussion. And we like to tell folks or new members, prospects, you can get out of this what you put into it. We have many people on the Alliance who actively engage, who are largely there to learn. Sure, we do have some policy wonks and people whose day job is like mine doing government relations, but we have plenty of people who are there to learn, be in the room, and lend their perspective when it's applicable to whatever it is we're talking about. And quite frankly, it's those perspectives of the actual small business owners that bring the most value to the work that we do. I
think with our legislators, I've said this often, you may get tired of hearing it, but I've never met a legislator who wants to do the wrong thing. I've met plenty who don't know what the right thing to do is, and the big value of regular business people in these conversations is those are the folks that elected officials want to listen to. They want to hear your story. They want to hear your experience. They want to understand your industry from your perspective, and they legitimately want to help it to be easier for you to sort of run and grow your business. So there's a big role for folks to be involved with this work. I think we try to make it easy. I think you and your team do a great job supporting folks who are new to the process, and show up and check it out. I'd really encourage people to get involved with the work we're doing there.
Awesome.
So last thing I'm going to ask you, I want your Akron Canton Jam. Give me a place in Akron Canton that you recommend people go or check out that they may not know about. You've got this expanded view of the entire region and the work that you're doing right now. Give me an example of some place that you'd recommend people should just check out.
So because the weather's nice and it's what I've been doing most recently, if you haven't checked out the Towpath Trail, whether it's walking, biking, hiking, running, dog walking, whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of different entry points throughout the region. Probably my favorite is one at a dog park actually called Bow Wow Beach. If you have a dog, it's a great resource for them. I don't recommend leaving them there unattended, but there is a bike path entrance right there that you could actually, bike for however many miles you'd like, quite frankly, across the region. But it's a great starting point, and there's always something going on there.
If you got Fido hooked onto your bike slowly, right? Yeah. Great. Well, John Rizzo, Vice President, Akron Canton Advocacy Alliance, thanks for your time today. Thanks for the work that you're doing, most of all, and the way in which you are representing and connecting our members to the people that make policy in the state and the federal government.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to do it.